It is September 30th, which means it is game week. We'll preview the week to come, some cool projections that I'm seeing about the Sabres in the league that I want to get to, and also some big news in the division to get to coming up today on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sneaky Joe DiBiase coming to you today on a Monday. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in and making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube channel where you can watch the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A lot to get to on today's show. Some news from the Atlantic Division, some cool projections about the Sabres that I want to get to from some respected numbers guys on Twitter and in the hockey media. And then also I want to get to the Sabres preseason finale, which is coming your way tonight. And just kind of the overall summary of what we've seen from those players, because they're going to go back to Rochester, and there are a couple of them that I've been very impressed with and would expect to see in Buffalo at some point this year. If not this year, maybe sometime next year as a regular. So all that coming your way today on the Locked On Sabres podcast. It is a game week, though. Friday, 1 o'clock in Prague. The Sabres will be on the ice playing the New Jersey Devils, kicking off the NHL season, and the Sabres will be kicking off their own season, hoping for a couple of wins against Lindy Ruff's former team. It's a revenge game, 2 revenge games right away. Saturday, 10 a.m. for the second game of the 2. We'll see what we get. We'll preview the Devils and get to that a little bit later on in the week. I also am hopeful that we could provide some bit of a break, be a little bit of a Bills break maybe for you today. For the Buffalo sports fan out there, it's a fan of both teams, which I know is most. The Bills get stomped on Sunday Night Football, unlike they haven't been stomped like that in 4 years. So if you're looking for a little change of pace today, then we're glad to provide that for you today on the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you want to join our Locked On Sabres text line, you could do that by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. We had some good discussion about that today. And there is a projection that I want to get to in the second segment of today's show that we had one texter text in about. Not a statistician, don't think 88 points is that far off, but I wonder about the numbers type of analysis based on previous data points and trends, and then evaluating a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 14 years. A lot of those data points are of low point totals and no real improvement. So would that analysis be more likely to predict that they would miss the playoffs? We'll get to the specific projection for the Sabres, but basically, I think the question there is anybody out there really picking the Sabres to make the playoffs? And is there any pathway to picking them to make the playoffs right now? I'll be honest. I have not seen anybody pick them to make the playoffs yet. I'm not doing it. I have not seen... maybe this week we'll see more, right? This is the week that you're going to see people really get in with their projections. But to this point, I have not seen somebody pick the Buffalo Sabres to make the playoffs. Most are projecting them to be close, but I haven't seen anyone that actually has them in. More on that coming later on today's show. Let's get to some news and notes for today's show. And we're going to start with the Sabres note and then get to a big news item in the Atlantic Division. But let's start with one injury to keep an eye on for the Buffalo Sabres. Not on their NHL squad, but more so on their AHL squad. Ryan Johnson is dealing with a little bit of a nagging injury. He is not going to play in this preseason game on Monday night, so that's an injury day-to-day to keep an eye on, and we'll see if he's able to open the season for the Amerks and maybe play at some point during the NHL season, because he is a little bit of an older prospect at this point, if you would even call him that. I mean, he is still going to development camps, but at 23 years old, the time to get going here. Time to make the team and show that you're a regular NHLer. And there was a time 3-4 years ago where I didn't think he would make the NHL. And then there was a time a year or two ago where I thought, okay, maybe he is. played 27 games last year, 41 games, played 27 for Rochester, 41 games for the Sabres last year. And now it's like he's 10th on the depth chart. Like he's really become buried on their depth chart on the blue line. So more on the preseason finale, though, a little bit later on. Let's get to this Atlantic Division news item because it's kind of crazy. You don't hear, not even just hockey teams, you don't hear sports teams talk this way, the way the Boston Bruins have talked here on Monday as they're having their season opening press conference. And they've got the president of the team there. They've got the coach. They've got the GM. President of the team, Cam Neely, former Bruin legend. He's the president of the Boston Bruins, Cam Neely. And Cam Neely got asked about his goaltender. If you have not been following the Bruins, Jeremy Swayman, their number one goaltender, who had been splitting time with Linus Ullmark over the last couple of years in Boston, and then had really started to take the job over last year, still is unsigned. And the Bruins traded Linus Ullmark away. So I'm sure they would have thought by this point they would have a deal done with their number one goaltender, or else they would have never traded Ullmark to Ottawa. I think they did get a first-round pick, so maybe the value pushed them over the edge on that. Swayman remains unsigned as we near the start of the NHL season. And Cam Neely got asked about Jeremy Swayman today and where negotiations stand. And what Cam Neely said is, I can't speak to Swayman's end of things, Swayman's ask, but if I were him, he said, I won't get into what his ask is, but if I were him, I'd have 64 million reasons I'd be playing right now. Kind of, in the way he said it, the tone in which he said it, like it seemed like he was coming off as though he was taking a shot at Jeremy Swayman. Like, dude, sign the contract. Sign the freaking contract. We offered you $64 million a year. That's how Neely kind of presented the take or presented the comment. So, all right. We now know, though, exactly what Boston is offering him. It's got to be, and they can offer him an 8-year deal, so I would assume it's an 8-year deal. They're offering him 8 over 8. They're offering him an 8-year deal worth $8 million per year. And I just wanted to get into a little bit today how there are a couple of interesting parts about this. Because if Boston doesn't have Jeremy Swayman, I've said this repeatedly, I am not going to bet against the Boston Bruins again until I actually see their downfall. I have picked against them multiple times in recent years. I picked against them last year because of their center depth. And it's like, no centers, no problem. They're the Bruins. They just figure it out. And some part of me thinks, yep, they won't have Jeremy Swayman, their number one goalie, and the Bruins, they'll just figure it out. But I do look at that roster and think, man, without him, that's not a great roster. That's not a great roster. It seems like if they didn't have that B on their logo, it would be a team I would want to bet against. So he's important to them. And he's a very, very good goaltender. He is one of the better goalies in the league. I don't think he's in the conversation as the best goalie in the league, but he's one of the better goalies in hockey. At .919 save percentage since he entered the league 4 years ago. Tremendous record. His goals saved above expected numbers are great. Wins the William Jennings Trophy with Linus Ullmark 2 years ago. 7th in the Vezina voting last year. Took the net over a little bit and became their playoff goaltender. And by the way, all those numbers I just gave you are regular season numbers. His playoff numbers are even better with a .922 save percentage coming off a playoff campaign where he was number one in all the playoffs. With a .933 save percentage for the Bruins. He was the one thing really keeping the Bruins in that series once the playoffs got rolling against Florida. So I think Swayman's a great goaltender. Is he worth the most money in the league? Because it kind of sounds like that's what he's pushing for. That he wants to reset the market. That he wants to be the highest paid or right on level with the highest paid goalies in hockey. Maybe $10 million a year or more. And I don't think he's the best goalie in the world, but it is interesting how hockey is so different from other sports, especially football. I mean, that should be, I think, assumed, right? Because of the financial difference on display between the NHL and the NFL. The NFL prints money every year. I mean, it is becoming global. They print money unlike any other sports league. The NHL, amongst the major sports leagues, and even if I include college sports, they're fifth at best. Maybe even they're lower than that. They're below college football. They're certainly below the other three major sports for this. And it's why their salary cap has been kind of flat. The NFL salary cap goes up a monster amount every single year. The NHL salary cap has gone up $6 million $9 million in the last 6 years. Total, it's only gone up $9 million. So the NHL cap, the financial element is not the same, and they do have a hard cap, but it is interesting that in football, it doesn't matter if you're the best quarterback in the world. If it's your turn to get paid, you reset the market. Matt Ryan, was he ever the best quarterback in the NFL? No, but when he got paid, where did he rank in salary? Number one amongst quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford was never the best quarterback in the league, but when it was time for him to get paid, where did he rank? Number one. This year, Jordan Love for a time, number one. Trevor Lawrence, number one. Like, they go right to the top of the list. Dak Prescott, the last quarterback to get paid $60 million a year. It was just his turn. He was the last to get paid, so where does he rank? Number one. That's how it works. In hockey, there's no growth at all on this front for player salary and resetting the market. Look at goaltender for this. And you can look at player-wise, too. It doesn't happen every year that there's a change. Maybe every third year if you're lucky. Goalie, it's even longer than that because Carey Price and Sergei Bobrovsky, Price hasn't even played for 3 years. Those two, Bobrovsky and Price, have been the highest paid goaltenders in the league for 6-7 years. And it hasn't changed. Nobody's come over top of Bobrovsky. He signed a long time ago. He's almost done with the contract. I think he's going into the final year of his deal. And here is Jeremy Swayman, and I think also Igor Shesterkin, by the way, right now in New York, that are saying, listen, I want to reset the market. Of course I want to reset the market. And the fact that teams are not open to that at all, I guess I understand it more than football because of the hard cap and because the salary doesn't grow as much. But I don't think it's unreasonable for Jeremy Swayman to be asking for $9.5–10 million a year. And it feels like the Bruins are approaching it as this giant crime against them. And I don't personally see it that way. But I'm rooting for it to not get done. I'm rooting for it to continue to get ugly. And I think it probably will get ugly because this is not new. The signs were there. Last year, Jeremy Swayman pressed the Bruins hard on his contract negotiation as an RFA, the first time he was an RFA, and they didn't end up agreeing. They went to arbitration. He was arbitration eligible a year ago, and he signed a 1-year deal through arbitration. So we pushed him hard last year. It's not a big surprise to see me pushing him hard this year, but it might mean he takes it into the season because he's shown a willingness to kind of get in, to kind of get that deal done, or to get the deal he wants done, and that's it. He's not going to be lowballed by his own team, not going to take a hometown discount. So good for him. I always like rooting for players and player rights in this scenarios. I just never understand some fan sentiment about this, how it's almost like they root against players getting paid more. Like, oh, that guy's not worth, whatever millions of dollars to play a sport. Because the one reason I never understand that is because if the player doesn't get the money, it's going into the pocket of the billionaire owner. And do they need the money? Why am I rooting for the billionaire to get more money than the millionaire? It doesn't make any sense to me. Why am I rooting for management over labor? It's a certain pet peeve of mine. So I'm rooting for Swayman to, one, get out of Boston, and two, if he does stay in Boston, to squeeze them out for every single dollar that he can squeeze out of them. And I do think that their team is in trouble if they don't have him. I'm not going to go all the way in because I've been burned by the Bruins one too many times. When we come back, speaking of the Bruins and projections, they're a part of this too. interesting projection for the season about the Buffalo Sabres that I want to get to when we come back. It's projection week, right? It's game week, and it is projection week. I'll have my projections a little bit later on in the week as well throughout the whole league, so that'll be fun. We'll get to all that coming up. And on this one specific projection, stay tuned here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented here on the show by Gametime. Hey, you got just over a week until those home games start, and you want to check out where to sit, how to go to the game on Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks, makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. Gametime Picks filter out the fluff, show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. There is a great list of different elements that I think make Gametime better than any other ticketing app. They have their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, seat views before you buy. You look at exactly what you're looking for. There's the super deal, all types of deals that are all over there. You look at the flash deals. I mean, just they've always got something to help you save money on your tickets. Check out the Gametime app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app. Create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. It's game week for the Buffalo Sabres, which means we're going to see a lot of projections, and there is a certain projection that I did want to get to this morning from Micah Blake McCurdy at Ineffective Math on Twitter. If you don't follow him, hockeyviz.com, one of the better number follows in hockey Twitter. He did his projections for the season, a detailed projection for every team this morning. And you're looking through, he's got a list of every team. And he's got the Atlantic Division maybe being a little bit lower than you might think. The bar to clear for the third division spot, who he has as Toronto, 95 points. Not that hard to achieve, I don't think. 95 points for top three. So then you keep scrolling, you go, okay, well, who's number 4? Now, in this hypothetical, in this projection, Micah doesn't have a fourth Atlantic Division team making the postseason because he has 5 teams from the Metro making it. Carolina, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, the New York Rangers, and then Philly squeaking in with 90 points just above Washington. Then 2 points out, actually first 1 point out of that 90-point threshold is Ottawa. Then the Sabres, 2 points back at 88 points. And I just want to get to a thought here about how that does seem to be where I'm seeing most people land on the Buffalo Sabres. I don't see many projecting them to make the playoffs. In fact, I still, like I said, haven't really seen anybody do it. I also haven't seen anybody project them to be like one of the worst teams in the league. They're very often in the mid to high 80s for point total, couple of points out of what would be a playoff berth, which means they'd be alive until probably the final week of the season in most of these projections, including in this one where they would miss by 2 points and would finish above Detroit, above Boston, by the way, above that. Micah's got Boston down to 86 points, and then Montreal down a little bit further than that. 88 points for the Sabres. I wonder how that number feels to fans, how that season feels, and whether that would feel like progress. Because in one sense, it would be progress. It would be better than they were last year. It would be the season is alive right to the very end, which means the season would be interesting, which means there would be a lot of points in the season. I'm sure that would be really fun. And, you know, I don't know how they would get there. Could they get, what would be more, would they get there like they did 2 years ago where they made this crazy run at the end to get 1 point out? Would they have a spot for a lot of the year and then collapse at the end? Because that wouldn't feel great. And also what it would mean to the future of their organization. And whether or not, does this mean Kevin Adams gets fired? Does this mean they're making substantial roster changes? Would they try to preach that it was a successful season if they don't make the playoffs? And it kind of just goes to, I saw this point projection and I thought about how, I just wonder, is it assumed from everybody that it is playoffs or bust? Is it 100% assumed that it is playoffs or bust? There is no season that you'd be happy with that involves the Sabres not making the postseason. Let me know what you think on that. You can tweet at me. You can hit me up on the text line. Is there any season that the Sabres could have that you would be okay with that involves them not making the playoffs? And a lot of people have them projected for seasons like Micah where they would just narrowly miss. 88 points, 1 point behind Ottawa. Kind of cool to see them above Boston, even in this hypothetical where they don't make it. I would disagree with him, by the way. I know he's doing number-based projections here that I don't think Washington or Philly is going to be better than the Sabres this year. I don't believe in either one of those teams. I could see Ottawa. I could absolutely see being better than the Sabres. Washington and Philly, I would bet against. Those teams are older, and Washington especially is more about just Ovechkin record chasing at this point, which is fine. I think they should do that. Philly, this Mishkov kid, we'll see. I reserve the right to change my mind on Philly if Mishkov shows up, who is the not second overall pick, a little bit later than that. But he's looked great in the preseason and might be a superstar right out of the gates. When we come back, we'll wrap things up with some notes on the preseason finale and kind of my overall summary on these B squad preseason guys that we've seen in the last couple of days for the Buffalo Sabres. That's coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We're presented here on the show by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, maybe in the middle of a Sunday, you can check out latest stats, live view play-by-play, and so much more on the same app where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Check it all out. Check out future odds for the Sabres before the season gets rolling this week, division odds, over-under point totals, and so much more. You can check it all out on their website at FanDuel.com. Final segment here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. All right, preseason finale, Sabres and Red Wings Monday at 7 o'clock at KeyBank Center. And more, rather than preview the game itself, because really the only big change is that Ryan Johnson's not going to play in this game. Their roster otherwise looks relatively the same. Recap what we saw on the weekend and what we've seen on the overall. There were two players that I was really watching for going into the preseason. One of which was Consta, first-round pick of the Buffalo Sabres. Has looked fine. Hasn't done anything spectacular, though. And to me, absolutely looks like someone that could have a good season in Rochester, but is probably going to be in Rochester for the entirety of the year. I would not project that he's going to get a call-up. The other name has started to pop. Noah Ostlund has now had some flash moments in 2 consecutive games. Noah Ostlund, who had the highlight reel overtime game-winning goal last week that made it on SportsCenter top 10 plays, then followed that game up with a tremendous effort against the Columbus Blue Jackets in a 6-3 loss. But Noah Ostlund had 3 assists with only 3 goals being scored by the Buffalo Sabres. Somehow got robbed of being one of the 3 stars of that game, by the way, I saw. And not only did he have 3 assists, every one of them was nice. Every one of them was even highlight reel worthy. The first of which, maybe not quite highlight reel, but it was a power play assist right on the tape, hard vision. The guy was in front of the net, perfect redirect, great pass by Ostlund. The next 2, I love when a player is capable of kind of flipping his hands around. And when he's skating down, being able on his almost his backhand side to be able to forehand pass the puck directly behind him around his body. That is a skill. That takes really good hands to be able to pull off. He did that and set up Zach Metza for the Sabres' second goal of that game. And then he followed it up with another spinorama assist on a 2-on-1 right on the money to Mason Jobst, who scored to make it 5-3 at that point. 3 great assists, the second and third of which were awesome. And the more I watch him in this preseason, the more confident he looks, the faster he is skating, the more confident he is with the passes he's trying. He certainly was confident when he was trying those passes and succeeding in making those passes against the Columbus Blue Jackets. I look at Ostlund and think, whew, there could be a real player in here. There could be a real player in here. And I do like reading some of the takeaway from some of the other Sabre media during this game, and a lot of our texters had a similar takeaway as well. And there was a couple of takes about Oslin that I liked, that he might just have the highest upside amongst the current Sabre prospects. And it's because the vision, the hands, the passing ability, playing the center position. Hadi Kalakash has been telling us for 2 years on this show that he thinks Oslin's their best prospect. I'm letting myself get a little bit excited for him. I don't let myself get excited for too many prospects, because it's been 10 years of doing that over and over and over and over and over, and it hardly ever actually lives up to the expectation. But in this situation, I might be letting myself just get a wee bit excited for what he's looked like and to see what he'll look like in Rochester. Right now, Isak Rozan, given that it's been this many years and he still doesn't make the club, I'm no longer tracking him the way I was. And Consta Hellenis being a first-round pick, excited about him, but I'm managing my expectations. The guy I'm most excited to see what he does for the Amerks all year long and maybe turn into a call-up later in the year is Noah Oslin. And it's a big testament to what he's done in the preseason that's done that for me. Nikita Novikov, of course, the other guy that's looked good in the preseason, but there's one problem with him so far in the preseason, is that he takes a lot of penalties. Nikita Novikov takes a lot of penalties. The discipline is going to have to be raised, or the responsibility on that end is going to have to get raised a lot before he's able to play in the NHL on a full-time basis. But he looks like he's got the talent to do it at the very least. All right. Hope you enjoy the final preseason game. And then it's on to the regular season. I'm excited. Friday at 1 o'clock, a little afternoon hockey, a little bit later in the week. We'll have my projections coming up this week. We'll have more of your takes. I'd like to hear your projections. If you've got a number for a point total in mind, throw it my way for what you think a reasonable expectation is for the Buffalo Sabres. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. All right, your options for your next listen, of course, you got a lot, but you've got Locked On Bills with Joe Marino if you're trying to figure out what the hell happened to the Buffalo Bills on Sunday night. Or if you want more of a league-wide perspective on the NHL, be sure to check out the Locked On NHL podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. Talk to you tomorrow on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.